Leaving Hong Kong behind, and with a new family member on tow, the Dowlings head for London and a short stay where the brothers cause havoc with the neighbours. And what's the story with the new sister? Chapter 3: Scooting and Looting. With a newly extended family, we crossed the world in 1958 and sailed back to England. By now we were becoming thin-blooded from living in the tropics, and on arrival in London suddenly needed to wear layers of jumpers and start wearing shoes. We must have looked like a bunch of refugees, and it wasn't long before we were clad in all manner of cast-offs. Ted's new posting was Putney, London, where we lived in a great big red brick house off Portinscale Road in a cluster of army homes called Oak Court. What can I say about Maria? It was odd having an adopted sister. She was a pretty girl and spoke no English that I can remember. We observed her from a distance as though she were an exhibit. She couldn't dress up as a cowboy and feign death like we did. The Maria days did not last long. It saddens me just thinking about it. My mother's aspirations for nurturing a girl must have been ill-founded, for it was not long before Maria became a victim of whatever was troubling Betty. How could anyone fathom what was happening? Betty must have been in a very bad place in those times of neglect. I plainly recall the day a social worker rocked up to remove Maria from my mother's clutches. These were dark days for her. The first time I realized that life is not just bird nesting, picking blackberries, scrumping for apples and being cuddled by loving parents. I attended school number 3, St. Joseph's, down Oak Hill Road. I mention the school names because a couple of years later, when I was about 10, I was sent to a boarding school in Ipswich named St. Joseph's. The junior version of the school was named Oak Hill. That's pretty spooky. I was already good at recognizing the odd way in which the world worked, how things seemed to happen based on thought alone, how coincidences were not coincidences if you really cast your mind back to what brought them on, how time is an illusion, parallel, not linear. This kind of thinking was to be of monumental importance to me later in life, to such an extent I even wrote a book about it. I was prone to being bullied while at the school in Putney. There, I discovered Michael stood up for me if anyone cast an evil glare in my direction. Before my brothers were shipped off to boarding school, they had a brief attendance at the same school as I, and Michael's care was resoundingly confirmed when he decked a lad who had been cheating me at marbles in the playground. Cheating is to extend one's arm too close to the target, thereby hitting Kieran's ball bearing and claiming it as the prize. I had turned 8 years old. Ted loved occasions, made a big deal of birthdays, but the gifts were creative and strange. Now that Sean and Michael were at boarding school, there was again loneliness in my life. I was trailing behind a couple of big brothers, and where they got real presents, I got ones which my father thought would build my character. On that birthday, along came a wooden scooter, big, thick planks of varnished pine, and a dandy set of handles with streamers dangling down to the ground. This monster even had a foot brake. Like most kids, I had problems sleeping before birthdays and Christmases. In fact, I couldn't sleep for days or even weeks before the time and dark rings would form under my eyes. "Darling," my mother would say to Ted. "Yes, darling." "He looks positively haunted, darling." They would both gaze at me and smile as though I was disabled or had a steel plate in my head. "It's his birthday soon." That punchline was enough to send waves of anguish through me. I was on my own the day that monstrous wooden scooter was presented to me. It was disappointing having nobody around to show off my present at 6 in the morning when only the blackbirds were out. I managed to knock on more than 20 doors to show the great wooden thing off to angry, yawning residents. There I stood like a salesman, beaming as the doors opened. "Look at my new scooter," I beamed. Our nearest neighbour was renowned cricketer Jim Laker. He's gone to the great oval in the sky now, but he would have remembered us. He had a lovely garden rolling down to a wall of trees and hedges bordering our own overgrown one. There he'd nurtured a miniature orchard of Cox orange pippin apple trees, lovingly tended with long stems and manicured crowns of leaves. Michael had got to know Jim's daughters. During late summer, when the apples were ripening, we wanted to sample them, but were forbidden to do so because, as we were told, they were ornamental. What a temptation, even though none of us knew what that meant. One night, Michael led us across the hedge and we stole every last one. But rather than risk capture with a lengthy picking session, we uprooted the trees and scampered off to feast on our booty. Naturally, the keen-eyed Jim knew it was us, and the next morning came to see Ted. My father rarely gave us much of a hiding, as he preferred dishing out creative punishments. On this occasion, he locked all three of us in the attic for a night. We were allowed bread and water only, but my lovely, smiling, kind and beautiful mother snuck us treats after Ted had left for work in his staff car. She was a real mother, all perfume and soft smiles, always there. Across the other fence was a wild pear tree. I climbed it one day to get a massive pear at the very top. It took me quite a while to make the climb. Just as I grabbed the prize, the branch I was standing on snapped. I fell 40 feet, and for a while lay there on a bed of leaves. I knew there was something very wrong with me because my head felt numb. I climbed back over the fence and went to our back door. Before calling for help, I lay on our doormat. I can't think why I did that, but I expect it was the peculiarity of my character beginning to come out. I was in such a state I felt I should first calm down, so I made myself smile. A forced, cheesy grin was drawn, I suspect, to cast aside the demons I felt crowding in on me. Then I got up and called. Betty gasped down at me as I lay still, curled up on the doormat like a stray dog whining for attention. There was something sticking out of my ear. When she touched it, I felt this terrible sensation in my head. My earlobe was dangling by a thread of skin like a macabre earring. Much of what followed was a blur as I was rushed to Putney Hospital and immediately operated on. When I came to, the doctor showed me this specimen of wood he'd deposited in a glass jar, a widget of pear tree that had missed my jugular by 1/16 of an inch, he announced. I hadn't the foggiest what he was talking about, but later, Betty said I would have bled to death if the stick had gone in any further. My earlobe had to be stitched back on. Nowadays, I can't use those little headphones that seem to nestle so snugly in other people's ears. I've given up trying because one ear just won't hold it. There these lucky people sit, in airport lounges, trains and the like, plugged into their phones while I'm forced to sport a pair of earmuffs, as though I'm cold or have a serious hearing impairment. Soon after, our location changed again. The last thing I remember of Putney was losing a 10-shilling note I had been given by Betty to go and buy her a packet of Woodbine cigarettes. It was an autumn day, oak trees shedding orange leaves on windy pavements, orange leaves that blended nicely with orange-coloured 10-shilling notes. It was also the first time my mother realized I was a willing soul, one who would gladly go out and get the shopping in all weathers. I could be seen zooming down the road with shopping bags attached to each of my scooter's handlebars. I was like a one-legged courier,